Good morning, everyone. If you can hear me, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand so that I know that you can hear me. Great. Thank you so much. Good. Okay. We'll get started in a few minutes. I want to give everyone a chance to log in. Because we have so many people attending today, or a large number of folks attending today, I have disabled the chat function for attendees, but if you have a question during the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A and enter your question into the Q&A, and I will answer all those questions at the end of the presentation. Oh, good. We've got a few more people showing up now. Welcome, everyone. Make sure you're in the, don't think you could be in the wrong place, but we're going to be talking about realistic expectations for lawns and some alternatives to turf grass today. All right, well, it's 11:01, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to see you here in the world of the internet, and I'm glad that you decided to join us for a webinar today. The title of the webinar today is just Let's Be Realistic About Lawns. This is part of a series of classes aimed to help folks in landscape maintenance. And we've previously had a class on tree care in the home landscape, and we will have another one later on in the year talking about some alternative ground covers and water conservation type issues related to landscape maintenance. My name is Alyssa Vincent. I am the residential horticulture agent at the Manatee County Extension Office. So I do normally work out of the office in Manatee County, Florida, but some of you all might be joining us from elsewhere in the state, and that is perfectly fine. This information will be applicable to you as well. So if you're not familiar with Extension, I just want to give a quick overview of who we are. We are a function of the University of Florida, the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. We are one of Florida's 2 land-grant universities. It's University of Florida and FAMU, Florida Agricultural Mechanical University. And there are extension offices in all counties in the state of Florida. And our mission as the IFAS extension is not just to do research on agriculture, human and natural resources, life sciences, but really to make that knowledge accessible to the communities in which we live, and also to provide a service to help sustain and enhance the quality of human life. So we're looking at how can we take the research that's done at the University of Florida and really provide it to our communities in an accessible way that is going to enhance the quality of human life. If you have a question, go ahead and enter it in the Q&A. I saw a few people raise their hands. If you have something that you'd like to ask, go ahead and enter it in the Q&A. You should see a little box that says Q&A with like a little thought bubble. You can click on that and enter your question there if you have a question. And I'll answer those as we go on towards the end. So I wanted to start, my background is actually in ecological sciences. I have a master's from the University of Florida in ecological restoration. And I want to talk about landscapes as a function of the ecosystems in which they live, or in which we live. So if we think about Florida, our area of Florida, prior to us inhabiting it, we had longleaf pine ecosystems that you see up here in the top left corner. So we'd have longleaf pine trees, saw palmetto, numerous wildflowers and legumes in what would be either a dry or wet kind of prairie-like environment within these tall stands of open longleaf pine trees. We do have some remnant longleaf areas in parts of Florida, particularly up in the Panhandle. We have some large areas still remaining of longleaf pine. But here on the Gulf Coast, I think be familiar with what we're seeing in the top right picture, which is our Gulf dune ecosystems, and those are sea oats that you're seeing there. And so we had these kind of piney, open savannas full of saw palmetto. And then as we transitioned to the coast, we entered into kind of a sandy dune system. And then in between those are pockets of what you're seeing on towards the bottom of the screen. That's actually a photo of the Everglades, but I'm sure we're all familiar with the wetlands in Florida. And we were full of wetlands. They pocketed our landscape across the entire peninsula. And one thing you can be sure of when you live in Florida is that water is always either next to you, above you, or underneath you. We have a very porous bedrock, limestone bedrock, that allows us to have an aquifer system with water kind of moving underneath us all the time. So we do have water around us all the time. So this is, I like to set the stage to talk a little bit just about what was here before we got here. And then we like to make things uniform, right? So a lot of our urban and suburban areas in Florida have begun to look more like what we're seeing on the screen here. So we have a lot of houses that have been built either in usually in remnant pine that was first transitioned to agricultural purposes and then transitioned into developed land. And so what generally happens in these areas, you have someone come through, they clear cut, maybe keep a few oaks or other kind of specimen trees towards the entrance of the new subdivision. And then they go through, build the houses, lay some sod, and install some homes, right? This is a fairly common kind of method that we see for creating new new dwellings, right? We need more houses. We need places for people to live. We need more affordable places for people to live. So it's important for us to continue to build and provide housing for folks. But you know, let's think about, we went from, you know, something like this to now a very different kind of environment, a very different kind of ecosystem. And it's hard to keep the plants that we put in these types of environments alive. You think about how disturbed the ground becomes during the construction of these subdivisions, and you end up with very low nutrient, very compacted soil, and not a lot of subdivisions take a lot of time and consideration into selecting the types of plants that go in initially upon development before people move in. And so what we're going to talk about today is why lawns? Do you need a lawn? If you do need a lawn, why do you want a lawn? What kind of turf grass would provide you with the type of lawn that that will really work for you? And then are there any ways that we could potentially maybe change up that formula a little bit? So some of the most common reasons why folks choose to have lawns is it's there when they move in, right? You buy a house, it's got a lawn. You keep it up as you go. Some people really like the nice uniform green look of a lawn. Some people have high use or high wear areas. Maybe you have 3 or 4 kids, you got a couple dogs, you like to play soccer, you like to have a space to run around. So you need to have something that can hold up to that kind of wear and that kind of use. You might live in a community where it's a requirement of your homeowners association that you have a certain percentage of turf grass in your landscape. That, you know, that might be something that's a requirement for you in some neighborhoods. I like to think a little bit about why lawns in the first place. Where did they come from? If you see the photo on the right here, this is a castle in France, and you notice that they have kind of these wide sweeping lawns in between hedges and flower beds. And this is really where human love of lawns started. If you look back to the aristocracy of Europe in the late 1600s, moving into the 1700s, these lawns became really prevalent, and they were a symbol of wealth and status, right? How better can you show the peons that you have money than growing a crop that you don't eat? So it became a really popular part of landscapes, and it's just something that has continued with us as we kind of traveled and colonized other parts of the world. I think there's a certain amount of kind of keeping up with the Joneses. You want to make sure your lawn looks as good as your neighbor's lawn. You may have some indications from your realtor or from things you've read online about property value associated with lawns. And while a well-maintained landscape does indeed increase your property value, so can having trees. You can have trees on your property, and that increases your property value as well. So I think that we need to be cognizant of where our desire for these types of landscapes comes from historically, and think about the realistic use and maintenance of them moving forward. So to turf or not to turf, you know, we've talked a little bit about the historical and environmental context of where we live and what we use lawns for. And so we're going to talk about types of turf, the 5 main varieties that you'll find here in Florida. And obviously, if you're coming from outside of the state of Florida, our turf grass does not look like your turf grass in Kentucky or Indiana, right? We have we have very different grass. I remember the first time I stepped barefoot on a Florida lawn and thought, oh my goodness, ouch, because I was used to Kentucky bluegrass, and it's very soft and very thick, and you know, that's just not something we have down here. We're going to talk about installation methods. So what are the best ways to install those different types of turf, some of the maintenance expectations you might have, recommended mowing heights, and then we're going to end with some alternatives to turf. So I'm going to show you some species and some plant varieties that can be an alternative to turf grass. But first, we are going to answer a couple questions. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. And if you would go ahead, and we'll take just a minute or two to answer these questions, then I'll share the results with you and we'll talk about your answers. So you should see these questions on your screen. So which of the following most closely describes your landscape desires? And then, do you have watering restrictions in your community? All right, good. Okay. Had one person saying that they can't see the questions. You may have it minimized on your screen. Double check that you don't have anything minimized. I know that there are some functionality differences between Macs, Apple computers, and other computers. So you may need to kind of look in your toolbar to see if the polls have shown up in a different spot. We've got 30 out of 34 folks having voted. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results so that you can see them. So that's great. So 47% of you say that you're interested in a landscape that's environmentally friendly. That's really good. 20% say they want it to be HOA rule compliant. Good. I mean, if you live in a community with HOA rules, you want to make sure that you're following those rules. Low maintenance and attractive are kind of equally there as the third most selected. So environmentally friendly, HOA rule compliant, and then attractive and low maintenance. And then for watering restrictions, we have good, about 75% say yes, they do have watering restrictions. Some do not, and a couple people don't know. And if you don't know, I would recommend reaching out to your county extension office. If you don't live in Manatee County, reach out to your particular county extension office. And if you do live in Manatee County, you can go ahead and you can reach out to us, and we'll let you know of any watering restrictions that may be in place. You can also check with the water management districts, because a lot of them are going to be, they're going to have that information kind of right up front. We are currently in what's considered a severe drought in our region. So in Southwest Florida, we are in a severe drought. It's not an extreme drought. We're in the orange on the kind of yellow to red scale, but we do need to be aware that we are in a drought right now. So check with your local extension office, check with your water management district. That would be Swift Mud, Southwest Florida Water Management District if you live in our area. All right, great. Okay. Let's go ahead and exit out of that. Good. So if we think about environmental friendliness of landscapes. We don't have to exclude turf grass. I think that we certainly live in a very polarized kind of environment related to these topics. And turf grass is one of those things that, like, some people love it, some people hate it, right? But we can definitely have a landscape that incorporates turf grass in a way that is environmentally friendly. And I think that recognizing the needs of the grass species and selecting appropriately for your landscape, for your needs, is going to be the best option to maintain that environmental friendliness. So these are the 5 main types of turf that we're going to find here in Florida. And again, you know, these are not going to look necessarily like your typical lawn grasses that you would find in a more northern or temperate climate. We are tropical, subtropical here. We have extremes of temperature as well as extremes of rainfall, right? We go through a very rainy season and we go through a very dry season. So the species that we use in our landscapes have to be able to withstand those types of gradients, those types of changes. So we have St. Augustine, which is probably the most common, ZOYSIA grass, BAHIA grass, Bermuda, and Centipede. Those are going to be the ones we talk about. I'll mention briefly here, seashore paspalum is another grass that has been used for turf, and it's particularly good in coastal areas because it has a high salt tolerance. But it is a little bit more susceptible to other things, and it tends to be used more frequently in golf course applications, so we won't be talking about that one in depth. So here we have a great table that I really like to show. It has the 5 main turf grass varieties at the top: BAHIA, Bermuda, St. Augustine, ZOYSIA, and Centipede. And it's going to recommend to you where you can plant it, and you'll see that all 5 of these are good statewide, what level of maintenance they have, so whether they're low, medium, or high, the establishment method that makes the most sense for that type. So some are seed or sod or plugs, or some are all 3. It's wear tolerance, so how well the grass is going to hold up to frequent walking or driving on, things like that. Drought tolerance, so how well it's going to be able to withstand periods of drought. Soil range, so acidic, basic, a range of those. Whether it can withstand any shade, which, you know, when we're talking about turf grass, grasses really are full sun plant species. They really prefer to have full sun. And so when you talk about kind of a fair or good shade tolerance, you should still anticipate that the grasses are not going to be performing at their optimum when they're in the shade. In particular, we'll talk about St. Augustine. It has really good shade tolerance, but it's still going to thin out and make it more susceptible to weed intrusion. And then nematode tolerance is something to be aware of as well. We do have nematodes pretty prevalently here in Florida. If you're not familiar with nematodes, they are microscopic worms, and they can do some pretty significant damage to the root systems of turf grass. So this is St. Augustine. It's probably the most commonly used type of turf grass here in the state of Florida. It has fairly thick, wide blades of grass. It's going to be a pretty nice green to blue-green color, and it will grow fairly thickly when it has proper nutrition. And again, this is probably the most shade tolerant of the types of turf grass we'll talk about today. But again, it does tend to spread out and thin out. And when it thins out in shade, it's going to be infiltrated by more weed species. And people tend to not not like it. One of the questions we hear quite often in the office is, you know, what kind of grass can I grow under my oak tree? And the answer is probably none. You know, you'll get some sparse St. Augustine underneath your oaks, but when it starts to really thin out like that, then you have a lot more weeds coming in, and so you should think about some other option for that area of deep shade. St. Augustine is prone to thatch buildup, which is if you're looking at grass, right, you have the active growing leaf blade at the top, and then you sometimes will see this kind of brown dead leaf material at the bottom of where those actively growing leaves are. And that thatch buildup can lead to issues with pests and disease. It's a favorite location for mole crickets. And so that's one thing to be aware of with St. Augustine. Here we have zoysia grass, and zoysia grass is similar in appearance to St. Augustine. It has slightly different mowing requirements. It's going to have a little bit better drought tolerance than St. Augustine does, so it might be a better choice for someone who is interested in that St. Augustine look, but they maybe don't want to use so much water. So this is a zoysia lawn that you see here. Here is BAHIA grass. BAHIA is very commonly used in areas where low to no maintenance is the desire. BAHIA is a pasture grass. It's commonly used in agricultural situations. You can see that it has very low wear tolerance. In the photo there on the left, that's an area where somebody is driving pretty frequently, and it's not holding up to that amount of wear. It tends to be a little bit more sparse in its growth pattern, which can allow for some weeds to infiltrate. And then you also get seed heads, which is the photo in the middle. They can pop up about 12 inches, and they tend to, you know, you'll have an appropriately mowed BAHIA lawn, and then you'll get these seed heads that pop up very high, and it becomes kind of a maintenance headache when they're going to seed. But again, this is a really great choice for areas where you really don't want to have to maintain it. BAHIA grass is great in sandy and low nutrient soils. It doesn't require really any supplemental fertilization, and it will really handle drought very well. Bermuda grass is going to be one of the higher maintenance grasses that you could choose for your lawn. You'll see that it does have this really nice blue-green coloration. It's a finer leaf blade. It can be mowed very short, and it's frequently used on golf courses and in sports scenarios. It's going to have one of the highest wear tolerances because of its very tight, compact growth. But again, it is a very high maintenance grass. And then centipede grass is fairly low maintenance once it's established, but establishment is difficult with centipede grass because it is a very slow growing grass. So you would want to probably install this with sod more than plugs, or certainly seed. And then centipede grass also has a very low salt tolerance. So you don't want to use it in an area where it may, if you have reclaimed water, if you would be irrigating with reclaimed water, or if you are anywhere close to a coastal area that could potentially get salt spray or something like that. All right, so I wanted to pull this up again because we're going to talk about, you know, once you have decided, okay, I want a low maintenance grass that does well in the shade. Okay, so you want a low maintenance grass that does well in the shade. So I'm going to choose centipede grass, okay? So I want to establish my centipede grass. You see centipede grass, it has seed, sod, or plugs there as an option. But what do I do? What do I do to get my yard ready for installation of this new grass? Well, there are several steps that you should take when you are getting ready to plant a new turf area. And this can be applied in an entire landscape situation or only in one small section of your landscape. One of the things to consider is, particularly if you live in a newer development, really the first 3 steps are very, very important for you. So the first step is clean and rough grade. So when you first remove all the vegetation that's there, or if there was none, maybe you're starting from scratch, you need to make sure that you remove any construction debris, any materials that could prevent the grass from growing. I know I've heard stories from folks who have just moved into their landscape or just moved into their house. They are having some problems in their landscape, and they go and start digging around a little bit, and they find, chunks of concrete, they find rebar. I had one person tell me they found a whole bag of mulch still in the plastic underneath where their plants had been installed. So it's important to remove the plants that are there, go ahead and clean it, rough grade it, use a rake, go through and try to get it evened out. But then you want to get a soil analysis. And this can be done at your local county extension office. Most offices will provide you with a soluble salts and pH analysis of your soil. And it's important to know what your soil type is, because certain grasses do better in acidic soils, and some will have challenges with fertilization due to the acidity of the soil. Next thing you're going to want to do is check for compaction. So particularly in these newer developments, you're going to want to take, bamboo stick, a dowel, something like that, and you're going to want to try to kind of poke around in the grass, in the area where you plan to plant the grass. And ideally what you want is for that stick that you're poking in the soil to easily go through the soil at least 6 inches. So you want to be able to easily get through the soil approximately 6 inches. And if not, then you're going to need to do some loosening of the soil. Prior to installing your plants is a good time to think about installing irrigation. Are you going to set up a temporary irrigation system? Do you need to dig lines and set up sprinklers? Are you planning on just, hooking a sprinkler up to a hose and watering as necessary? These are all different options, but now would be a good time before you plant your plants, if you have that option, to install your irrigation. And I would recommend checking out some of the available technology, including soil moisture sensors that will incorporate additional data into when things are watered. And if you need any help with irrigation, I definitely recommend reaching out to our mobile irrigation lab that we offer in partnership with the County Utilities Department here in Manatee County. We have folks that will come out to your landscape. They'll look at your existing irrigation. They can make recommendations for you on how to retrofit that irrigation to make it more efficient. So definitely reach out to us regarding the mobile irrigation lab if you're interested in that service. After you have gone ahead and installed any irrigation you are planning to, now would be a good time to go through and till. You can rent a, again, this is particularly important in areas of high compaction, and think about adding organic matter. So in areas, all through Florida, we have fairly low nutrient soil. And in particular, areas that are newly constructed tend to have fill brought in, and that fill is usually very, very low nutrient, very low in organic matter. And part of what organic matter in the soil does for plants is it increases aeration. So in part with this tillage, think about adding some organic matter. This could be in the form of, black cow compost, something like that. And look forward to some research coming out here in the next couple years there are some test plots currently that are incorporating compost into soils in new developments and then ascertaining whether or not that improves plant health. And then once you've gone through, you tilled, you've added your organic matter, now you want to go through and do your final grade. Make sure that you don't have a lot of lumps and bumps and hills. You don't want water collecting in certain areas. You don't want gaps between where the roots of, particularly with sod, you don't want gaps between where the roots are and where the roots would connect with the soil, because those roots would then die. So make sure that you go through and you get that, that final grade complete. And then if you are planning to seed, you can see for the 3 varieties where seeding is recommended, we have here the seed quantity, pounds per 1,000 square feet. And you're going to want to have an even distribution of seed across that newly tilled and leveled and graded landscape. So BAHIA grass is going to be the most consumptive at 5 to 10 pounds per 1,000 square feet. And then centipede grass is the lowest at 1/4 pound per 1,000 square feet. And that's mainly due to the way that those grasses grow. Centipede grass will grow over the top of the land via stolon, and so it doesn't need as much seed spread out because of the way it grows. Spacing and material for sod for vegetative planting. So if you're doing plugs or sprigs, this is going to give you information on how far apart to space those plugs or sprigs. And then if you need sod, that's going to be the amount of sod, so that's square footage per 1,000 square feet. So if you have a 2,000 square foot area that you want to cover in St. Augustine grass, you may need up to 30 to 50, so you may need up to 100 square feet of sod to cover that area. And these tables are, I'm going to list the reference materials at the end of this slide, and these are all from EDIS publications that were written mainly by Lori Trenholm, but also by some other folks up at UF. So I'll share all these resources at the end of the presentation. Whew, all right, so you've planted, you've got your seeds down, you put your sod down, you feel good. You don't want to end up like this guy, right? Oh my gosh, so much grass to mow, so many different considerations for maintenance. What can we do to make sure that we don't end up like this guy? One of the first things to consider is with our watering. Oops, I apologize. Let me go back there. When we're watering, when you were thinking about irrigation, if you installed soil moisture sensors, that's one thing that's a really great option for folks who are installing new irrigation systems. One thing to be aware of is that rain sensors are a requirement of Florida law. It's something that you need to make sure that you have functioning with your irrigation system. Florida soils, because they're so sandy, they're only going to require approximately 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch of irrigation to get that water all the way through where the roots are going to be located. And you really only need to water when your grass begins to show signs of drought. But how do you know what that looks like? Well, for different grass species, it can mean different things. Often it's going to be a slight curling of the leaf, a little bit difference in coloration. When you walk on the grass, you may look behind you and see that you've left footprints behind, and that's an indication of drought stress on your grass. So there's no cut and dry, you need to water every 3 days, period, right? It depends on how much water your irrigation system is putting out. And it's also going to depend on whether you have any watering restrictions in your area. And it's also going to depend on how much rainfall you've had. I highly encourage folks who are here seasonally that when they leave in the summer, they could probably turn their irrigation systems off. Because I've seen quite often folks, in unoccupied homes where sprinklers are running while it's raining. And this is, because the rain sensor has stopped functioning and nobody is there to kind of monitor it. And you end up using irrigation water while it's raining. Fertilization is the same. I'll show you a table that has recommended fertilizer rates for different grasses. But one of the first things you want to make sure that you're doing is getting a soil test. And the reason, again, this is important is because the acidity of your soil or alkalinity is going to determine how the fertilizer you put onto your lawn interacts with your lawn. For instance, some nutrients are not available to plants at a higher pH. So you want to make sure that you know kind of the basic pH and salinity of your soil. So get a soil test, know kind of those very basic things about your soil, and then you can look at these recommended fertilizer tables. And with mowing as well, each turf variety is going to have a different desired mowing height. I'll show you some recommended mowing heights here in a second. But you think about BAHIA grass is going to have a different recommended mowing height than ZOYSIA grass. They're going to have different requirements. How do you mow at different heights? One of the things you can do is, if you have folks that you pay to maintain your lawn, make sure that they know what type of grass you have. Ask them to describe to you how they're approaching your lawn, maybe differently than your neighbors. Are they lowering their mower decks to make sure that they're getting that desired height, or are they raising their mower decks to make sure that they're not trimming the grass too low and scalping it? If you are mowing yourself, then double check your lawnmower. You can raise and lower your lawnmower to get different desired heights. We definitely recommend to keep it as high as you can, just because you want to avoid scalping your grass. Because if you scalp your grass, that's where your mower blade is going to take those grass blades all the way back down to the bare dirt. You now have a bare spot in your lawn that is going to be susceptible to weed infiltration and pests and diseases, and you've now seriously stressed out your grass. So avoid that as much as you can. Pests are something that we'll talk about in a little bit. Do you have a grass that's more susceptible to pests? If so, know what the early signs to watch out for are, and then you can address the problem quickly rather than wait for your brown patch disease to engulf your entire lawn. So here we have suggested mowing heights. You'll notice Bermuda grass is very low at 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches, while BAHIA grass is very high at between 3 and 4 inches. So this is also something to consider when you are planning what type of grass you want to install. Think about where approximately you want that grass to be height-wise. Do you have any reasons to restrict the height? Do you need an area with lower grass? You might want to choose a variety that recommends lower mowing in those areas. If you try to trim your BAHIA grass to a 1.5 inch height, it is not going to survive. It's going to be very sparse, very thin, and very stressed. And this table here is going to talk to you about the recommended application rates for turfgrass fertilizers to Florida lawns. And again, if you live in an area where there is a landscape maintenance company who is performing this for you, do make sure that they are GIBMP certified, so Green Industries Best Management Practices. Make sure that they have that certification, and talk to them about their fertilization schedule, and ask them if maybe have they seen this table? Are they aware of how much different rates of fertilizer they're putting down? Do you have any restrictions over certain seasons on applying fertilizer? Some counties and municipalities have instituted rules regarding the application of nitrogen and phosphorus during certain times of the year. Here in Manatee County, we have soil that is very rich in naturally occurring phosphorus. So we actually have restrictions on applying phosphorus all year round because we have soil that is so rich in phosphorus. So beware of where you live, and make sure that you're talking to the people who are taking care of your landscape if you're not the one who's doing it. And again, I'm not going to go through and read the entire table here, but it will be available to you at the end of our presentation. So what are some common problems that people run into? I know we get calls frequently, my grass is yellow, right? My grass is brown and crispy. I have lots of this small plant with, that looks like a circle. The leaves look like a circle. It's probably dollarweed, which is a common weed. And one of the first things that we're going to do in our office, or our Master Gardener volunteers will do when they talk to people about some of their common problems, they're going to ask about, how do you take care of your lawn? How often do you irrigate? Is it particularly sunny? Is it in the shade? Has it been mowed recently? Has there been any instances of scalping? You know, these are all questions we're going to ask you to try to figure out if there are maintenance or cultural practices that could change the problems that you're having. So, you know, some common insects, again, mole crickets, chinch bugs. St. Augustine grass tends to be very prone to chinch bug damage. So be on the lookout for that. They tend to prefer areas that are really hot and dry, where the St. Augustine grass is under a lot of drought stress. So, you know, one of the maintenance and cultural practices you can do to prevent chinch bugs is to make sure that you are watering appropriately. Weeds are a big question we get, and you know, one of the really common ones is there's dollarweed in my lawn. And if you have dollarweed in your lawn, then that means that you are watering too much. You're watering too frequently, or you're putting out too much water per irrigation event. With diseases, that's going to be a little bit different. You're going to definitely want to take photos, and you're going to want to send those in. There's an email address here at the top of the screen, manateemg@gmail.com. And if you send really good high-resolution photos, we have a whole host of volunteers that will research and provide some potential answers for you. And if they can't provide you with an accurate answer or diagnosis, we have an entire lab at the University of Florida where we can collect samples from your lawn, and we can send those samples up to the university, and those research scientists up there will tell us exactly what disease it is and exactly what we need to do to fix it. Okay, so we've talked about the good things, the bad things with turf, why maybe we might have turf, some of the maintenance associated with turf. And now I want to talk a little bit about turf alternatives. So what are the benefits of using something other than turf grass in your landscape? Well, one of the biggest ones is there's not going to be any mowing, or very little mowing if you do mow, maybe once a year for some species, and I'll talk about that in a second. You're going to generally have fewer chemical inputs. You're not going to be putting down as much fertilizer. You're probably going to be watering less. Some of the things I really am interested in are the benefits to pollinators and wildlife. When you provide a variety of sizes and shapes and heights to the plants in your landscape, you really increase that wildlife benefit. You're going to see birds. You're going to see bees and butterflies. You're going to see snakes. You're going to see really cool beetles. You're going to see lots of interesting things in your landscape that you wouldn't see if you just had a turf lawn. So those are, you know, just some of the things that I really like about turf alternatives, but also you can really change up the variety of textures and colors that you have in your landscape as well. So instead of just a vast expanse of green, what you can have then, you can incorporate multiple colors, multiple textures, and really create a very beautiful, beautiful landscape. And one of the species that I love to talk about is actually native to Florida. This is sunshine mimosa, and you can see a little honeybee flying up to this powder puff here. They bloom prolifically in full sun, and they will, this is a species that likes full sun. It can handle minimal wear, and it could be mowed probably once a year to maintain a height that you would like. But sunshine mimosa does great in covering areas where you want a really low maintenance landscape, and in particular areas where you might have a really bright and sunny location, and you need something that can handle that amount of sun. Sunshine mimosa does great in those areas. And again, this one is a Florida native, and I took this picture in my front yard. Perennial Peanut is another very common ground cover. It's used very frequently in median plantings because it is low maintenance, high drought tolerance, and it requires few fertilizers, if any, because of its nature as a legume. So it has the ability to fix nitrogen in the soil, and then so it doesn't need as much input in the form of fertilizers. And actually, mimosa is a legume as well, so it will do some of that nitrogen fixing. Jasmine, this is used pretty frequently as well. It's a really good ground cover. It can handle some shade, not a ton, but it can handle some shade. And they're coming out with some really neat new varieties of jasmine. The one you see over here is a summer fire, I think, and it has the yellow and orange variegation, and so you can really change up the colors of the jasmine, which is really nice. Juniper is one that's used occasionally. This one's going to do really well in more kind of central and north Florida, but it does create a really nice ground cover, and you can find it in this green, and you can also find it in a very kind of silvery blue, which is really nice, especially if you want to use it as a large mass planting in front of some taller, differently textured plants. And there are many, many others. One of the ones that I've seen used over here on the left is mondo grass. Mondo grass creates these little, I kind of think of them as like little hobbit hills all around your landscape. So they're going to be these little round tufts of grass. Blue-eyed grass, which is this purple flower up here in the top. Blue-eyed grass is going to be another kind of mounding, clumping grass that you could use in a mass planting as a ground cover. The one here in the middle towards the bottom, this one is another Florida native. This is frog fruit, Phylla nodiflora, and this one can be used really well as an intermix planting with sunshine mimosa. And then over here on the right is a plant that really I don't think gets enough praise. This is native peperomia, and it's a wonderful plant in the shade. It does really well in shade, and it's going to create kind of a big mounding mass planting. It'll probably get up to about 12 inches high, but it'll really spread out really nicely. And it's got these really thick succulent leaves, very beautiful plant there for the native peperomia. And that is what I have for you today. Here are the references I mentioned. Each of these numbers and letter combinations is for an EDIS publication, which is a really great resource if you're not familiar with it. You could go to your Google search bar and just type in ENH 979, and it would pull up Best Management Practices for the Whole Lawn by Lori Trenholm. All of these tables that I pulled from today for this presentation can be found in these EDIS publications. And I thank you for your time. And we have 9 minutes. I'm going to go through the Q&A now. Let's see here. Okay, somebody asked about where they can find sunshine mimosa and does it spread? Yes, it does spread very well. Look for it at your native plant nurseries. You can usually find it if you check the Florida native nurseries. If you Google Florida native nurseries, it'll pull up it'll pull up a whole list of nurseries that sell native plants in your area. You can search by zip code, and then you can find some of the mimosa there. You may be able to find it at some other nurseries as well if you ask for it, but your best bet is to go with a native nursery first. Someone asked, can rough mulch from somewhere like chip drop be a source of organic matter between sand and sod? I would not recommend that because that mulch hasn't decomposed yet, and there's going to be a lot of air space. So if you try to lay sod on top of that mulch, you're going to end up with a lot of root death, because the sod wants to be directly in contact with a soil. It wants to be right there on the soil so that those roots can grow. If it's not, then you're going to have you're not going to have as good success with that planting. Okay, let's see here. This is a pretty common question. I have dogs and they pee a lot. What is the best for surviving dogs? Look for a grass with high salt tolerance. So depending on where you live, you may even think about one of the paspalum varieties. Something like sea plume, I think, is one of the cultivars of seashore paspalum. And you may want to just put it in the area of the yard where the dogs frequent. That one would be that would be my best recommendation, something that can handle high wear and something that has a higher salt tolerance. Peperonia, yeah, I know. It's peperomia, so P-E-P-E-R-O-M-I-A, peperomia, and it is native to Florida. There are non-native varieties as well, and there are several peperomias that are used as houseplants, but there is a native peperomia, and you can find it at some of our native plant nurseries. Is soil analysis available right now at the Extension Office? Not right now. The county is working on a plan to kind of repopulate our office. And once we have a sufficient number of staff in the office to process those soil samples, we will be taking those soil samples again. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and get that information out on our website and out on social media when that service is again available. We are, as I'm sure many of you know, working remotely, working in and out of the office, and that's, you know, it's challenging, but we will be providing that service again as soon as we can. You can, if you are looking for immediate results, you can go to the soils lab at UF directly, and you can mail your soil samples directly to the soils lab at UF. Those folks are still working in the lab, and you can get a more detailed analysis of your soil if you'd like to do that. A question about condo associations converting to St. Augustine, or converting from St. Augustine to a more environmentally friendly ground cover. There are some large neighborhoods. I know of one down in Sarasota County that has been in the process of transitioning all of their landscape to Florida-friendly landscapes. And there's some interesting research being done with that association. I can think of some others that have moved from St. Augustine grass in median plantings, and in areas like that little strip of grass that grows between the sidewalk and the road, that's commonly replanted with something other than St. Augustine. Is aerating necessary is the next question. It's only really necessary if you have that compaction. So that's why you want to check for compaction. If you can easily insert a stick or a dowel at least 6 inches into your soil, then you should be okay. Mondo grass does stay in clumps. It gets larger, but it's a clumping grass. It's not, doesn't spread via stolon or rhizome, so it's not going to go over top of the soil or underneath the soil and come up from underneath. Sunshine mimosa will, it does go slightly dormant in the winter, so that's why you may want to think about intermixing it with some other species. I do have a mimosa lawn, if you will, in my yard, and one of the nice things about, even if it does go dormant in the winter a little bit, all the other species that would infiltrate it during that time are also dormant. So things like some of our weedy grasses and Biden's alba, those things are going to go dormant in the winter as well. So so it doesn't tend to be an issue where it gets outcompeted by other species. What is the best ground cover option for soil retention in sand dunes with high erosion and wear? Honestly, the best thing for sand dunes is going to be the species that were adapted to live in sand dunes. And that's going to be things like sea oats, railroad vine, some of the native salt grasses, so things like Disticus spicata. But if you're looking for something in an area that is a sand dune, I would definitely reach out to a native plant nursery and ask them for some recommendations as well. But yeah, I would go for those native adapted species for those, because those are very harsh environments. You have very low nutrient, high salt, high wind, high heat. So yes, I would look for those native species, things like sea oats or railroad vine. The name of that place in Sarasota, Pelican Bay, I believe is the name. I would have to follow up on that, but I'm pretty sure it's Pelican Bay down in Sarasota. And what are some of the best ground covers for under an oak tree? Well, you can think about peperomia because it does well in the shade. Jasmine will do pretty well too under an oak tree. Think about maybe creating a mulched landscape bed around your oak tree that incorporates some shade tolerant species. You can think about things like cast iron plant is one that people use pretty frequently in high shade. Those are all some options. And if you have, again, if you have specific questions related to your specific landscape, I highly recommend emailing manateemg@gmail.com and we can help you. We also have a service called the Landscape Assistance Program through our Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, where we will have folks walk you through a whole landscape analysis and help you with plant selection and recommendations such as fertilization, irrigation, soils, all of that. So, so definitely reach out to us. And that's all the questions. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. And have a wonderful day.